We've just got some breaking news in from Buckingham Palace, folks. So this statement has just come in from Buckingham Palace, and I'll read it for you. It goes on to say, His Majesty has today initiated a formal process to remove the style, titles and...
The musicians were already in position. Hundreds of invited guests had taken their seats, and King Charles was only moments away from entering the evening reception when his expression suddenly changed. In the front row, occupying a place no one believed had been approved, sat Prince Harry. The king stopped walking, stared across the room, and issued an order that stunned the entire palace. The reception was cancelled, effective immediately. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles knew the gathering carried enormous weight. Senior royals, diplomats, military representatives and charity leaders had assembled at Windsor Castle, expecting unity. An evening reception is a formal royal gathering where the monarch welcomes selected guests and signals who stands close to the crown. That message shattered completely the instant Harry appeared. William felt the danger before anyone spoke. The final seating plan sent to the king's office contained no mention of his brother, and a front-row position could not be dismissed as a clerical mistake. Someone with authority had changed the arrangement after approval and placed the Duke of Sussex where Charles could not avoid him. Charles stopped beneath the entrance arch and tightened his hand around his walking cane. He leaned toward the Lord Chamberlain, the senior palace official responsible for major royal occasions, and spoke with terrifying control. No speeches. No receiving line. End it now. The courtier stared back, certain he had misunderstood the monarch. Harry remained seated while confusion spread through the guests. Heads turned. Whispers followed. His guarded expression held before humiliation broke through. He understood. The cancellation was not a scheduling change or security delay. His father had seen him and had chosen to stop the entire reception rather than enter the room. Camilla moved closer and warned Charles that cancelling everything would create a greater scandal than Harry's presence. The Queen Consort urged him to continue and confront his son later behind closed doors. He did not answer her. His eyes remained fixed on the front row, where the younger prince sat beneath the weight of every stare. William watched the exits instead. As attendants guided guests away, the future king saw Harry rise and pass a folded place card to an unidentified royal aide. The gesture changed everything. His brother had not simply arrived hoping to be noticed. He had come with proof that someone inside the palace expected him there. The reception had been stopped in less than a minute, but the real shock was not that Harry had appeared. It was that someone inside the palace had deliberately placed him where the king could not ignore him. To the hundreds of guests forced from Windsor Castle, it looked like a royal scheduling disaster. To the family behind the closed doors, it was something far more painful. Harry's seat in the front row placed him only a few feet from the father he had publicly challenged, and the brother, who no longer trusted his intentions. Every glance carried years of anger. Every silence concealed a conversation that had never been finished. Charles entered the evening already carrying weeks of private strain. His advisors had been discussing whether Harry should be allowed back onto palace property for family occasions, but no decision had been reached. Palace property meant residences and official royal buildings controlled by the crown, and access to them carried a message far beyond a simple family visit. One invitation could be seen as forgiveness. One public appearance could look like restoration. The king withdrew into a smaller reception room after cancelling the event. He removed his glasses, placed them beside the printed program, and sat without speaking. The monarch had expected pressure, criticism, even another painful request from his younger son. He had not expected to look across a crowded hall and find him sitting there as though the distance between them had already been erased. Harry saw the matter differently. He believed that appearing openly would force his father to acknowledge him as family, rather than as a difficult issue handled through secretaries and legal advisors. The Duke of Sussex had spent too long receiving controlled replies through palace offices. To him, the front row was not merely a seat. It was a demand to be seen. William felt something colder. The prince had supported limited private contact between his brother and their father, but he had opposed any sudden public return that could suggest royal status had been restored. He feared Harry was using the reception to reclaim standing without first answering for the damage that had divided them. Catherine found her husband standing alone beside a closed window. She asked what he had seen before Charles entered. William hesitated, then admitted that Harry had looked directly at him from the front row, almost as though he were waiting for his elder brother to object first. The future king could not decide whether the stare had been a warning or a plea. Camilla then broke the silence through a private account given to Charles inside the reception room. Harry had sent the king a message earlier that afternoon asking for 10 uninterrupted minutes. The queen consort explained that no reply had been sent, yet the younger prince had arrived anyway. An aide made the final detail impossible to ignore. Harry knew the exact entrance time and route Charles would use. Information restricted to a tiny inner circle. Harry's presence was already reopening old wounds, but the secret message proved that the evening had not begun at Windsor Castle. It had begun weeks earlier, with a promise made behind the king's back. Harry had not crossed the palace threshold on impulse. His return was connected to one private encounter that the king had never been told about, a conversation held after a memorial service, away from cameras, senior aides, and the formal machinery of the crown. During that meeting, a senior royal made Harry a promise. If he returned quietly and accepted strict conditions, he would be given one chance to speak directly to his father. Harry had spent months trying to reach Charles without success. Security conditions changed, confidentiality demands hardened, and every proposed meeting collapsed over who would be allowed inside the room. The Crown's formal machinery meant the network of advisors, offices, and protocols that controls royal access. Each failed attempt made the distance between father and son feel less temporary and more permanent. Anne had watched that silence deepen. The princess believed statements and intermediaries were turning private pain into institutional warfare, and she warned both sides that the family was approaching a point where pride would become irreversible. She wanted one conversation without lawyers, press officers, or carefully written replies. 3 weeks earlier, after a memorial service at St. George's Chapel, Anne found Harry alone in the North Cloister. The chapel is the royal church inside Windsor Castle, while the cloister is the covered passage surrounding part of it. She stepped close and spoke without ceremony. "Come without cameras, without demands, and I will make sure your father hears you." Harry asked whether William would be present. Anne closed the chapel door behind them and answered that the first meeting would begin with Charles alone. She made the condition clear. He had to enter quietly, remain out of public view, and treat the moment as a family conversation, rather than a royal return. Harry heard permission. The princess meant opportunity. That difference became the fault line beneath the entire evening. He believed the promise gave him the right to appear at Windsor, while she believed it allowed only a hidden meeting after the reception ended. Charles felt the betrayal immediately when he learned what his sister had done. The king accused Anne of creating a crisis without his knowledge. She refused to apologize, telling him in a private recorded conversation that silence had become more dangerous than confrontation. The monarch answered that compassion did not give anyone the right to override his authority. The original arrangement placed Harry inside a private library until the reception had finished. That plan changed less than 40 minutes before Charles arrived. A senior household office used internal authorization to move him into the front row. William demanded the approval record. The digital entry revealed a code assigned not to Anne, but to the king's own private office. Someone had transformed Anne's discreet peace offering into a public ambush, and before the night was over, Charles would confront Harry face to face to learn whether his son had planned it. The guests had left, the musicians had packed away their instruments, and Windsor's grand reception rooms had fallen silent. But Harry did not leave. On the king's direct order, he was escorted into a smaller chamber with no cameras, no press officers, and no audience to influence either man. Charles entered several minutes later and locked the door himself. For the first time that evening, father and son stood close enough to speak without the monarchy between them. Charles refused to let security remove Harry before he had answers. The altered seating plan was no minor mistake. A seating plan is the official arrangement showing where every guest must sit, and changing it without approval could challenge the king's authority in front of the entire royal household. He needed to know whether his younger son had helped create the humiliation. William asked to enter before the meeting began. The prince warned that Harry had already turned a private matter into a public confrontation, but Charles blocked the doorway. He told his elder son that the first exchange would remain between a father and the child he believed had defied him. The future king stepped back, angry but silent. The door closed. Charles crossed the room and placed the unauthorized place card on the table between them. His voice stayed low. "Did you know where they were seating you?" Harry looked at the card, then met his father's stare. "I knew you would see me. That was the point." Charles accused him of using a family opening as public pressure. The king said the front row had made Harry appear restored before trust, duty, or responsibility had been discussed. His son answered that private doors had remained closed for years. He would no longer accept being treated like an invisible problem passed between advisors. Harry then invoked Anne's promise. He said the princess had guaranteed he would be heard if he returned without cameras or demands. Charles struck the table with his palm and replied that being heard did not mean arriving, as though his former royal position had already been returned. Harry denied altering the arrangement. The Duke of Sussex explained that one of Charles's assistant private secretaries, a senior aide who helps manage the monarch's schedule and correspondence, had met him at a side entrance and handed him the front row card. He then produced a saved message, giving the exact seat number and entry time. Charles read it twice. The language was unmistakable. Clipped instructions, internal phrasing, and wording used only within palace communications. The ambush had come from his own household. Harry moved toward the door, then stopped. He told his father the aide had not acted alone. The seat had been chosen to force Charles into making a decision everyone could witness. The king had entered the room, believing Harry was the architect of the disruption. He emerged, knowing that someone closer to the throne had manipulated both father and son. The monarchy survives through order. Every doorway approved, every chair assigned, every movement timed. Harry's front row seat therefore represented more than a family provocation. It was proof that someone inside the king's trusted household had overridden established instructions and used a royal reception to manufacture a crisis. Charles could forgive an emotional mistake from his son. What he could not tolerate was the discovery that his own authority had been quietly redirected. William moved first. He ordered the reception records secured and instructed that no aide linked to the seating change leave Windsor until the authorization chain had been traced. The authorization chain is the recorded path showing who approved a decision and when. For a last-minute change involving a senior royal, permission had to come from the Lord Chamberlain, the king's private secretary, or Charles himself. Camilla watched the monarch read the internal log in silence. His hand stopped over one entry. The code belonged to a long-serving deputy secretary who had worked beside him since before his accession, the formal moment when he became king. She saw the hurt before the anger appeared. This was not an unknown clerk. This was someone Charles had trusted with his movements, his correspondence, and his private fears. Charles summoned the official into the private library. The king placed Harry's front row card on the desk and slid it forward. He asked only one question. "Who told you this was my wish?" The deputy secretary lowered his eyes, but the monarch refused to fill the silence for him. The official finally admitted, in a documented account recorded by the king's senior secretary, that he had arranged the change because he believed an unavoidable encounter would protect the monarchy from a longer public feud. Charles answered without raising his voice. Loyalty without permission was still disobedience. Good intentions did not excuse taking control from the sovereign. Anne entered moments later and defended the original plan to bring Harry into the palace quietly. The princess condemned the front row placement, insisting she had never approved a public display. William rejected that defense. The prince argued that every breach involving his brother was eventually softened by the same excuse. Someone had meant well. The room tightened when the deputy secretary named another person. Camilla's senior advisor had encouraged the change, claiming Charles would never meet Harry unless the decision was taken out of his hands. The queen consort immediately denied authorizing any such move, but her denial did not end the suspicion. A handwritten appointment note changed everything. It showed that her advisor had met Harry's representative earlier that week. The crisis was no longer confined to Charles and Harry. It had reached the Queen's household, placing Camilla between her husband's fury and an advisor who claimed to have acted to protect him. By midnight, the cancelled reception had become more than an embarrassing interruption. Invitations were being questioned, staff access was being suspended, and senior members of the family were retreating into separate rooms. Charles had lost confidence in part of his household. William believed Harry's return had endangered royal control. Camilla felt exposed by the actions of her own advisor, and Harry, still inside Windsor, discovered that his attempt to be seen had left him more isolated than before. The palace issued a brief explanation, citing an urgent private matter, but the wording convinced no one. Departing guests had already linked the cancellation to Harry's place in the front row. A private matter is palace language for a situation the royal household refuses to explain publicly. And that silence only made the shock feel larger. William ordered security access frozen for the deputy secretary and Camilla's advisor. The prince's staff began tracing how Harry entered the secure reception area, who cleared his route, and who changed the seating plan. Every answer mattered, because one unauthorized decision had exposed how easily personal loyalty could bypass royal control. Camilla sat alone after her advisor was removed from duty. The queen consort took off a bracelet, placed it beside her untouched tea, and told her dresser that Charles had not spoken to her since the confession. She felt punished for a plan she denied approving, yet she also knew the damaging order had come from inside her household. Harry received instructions that his vehicle would leave through a private gate. The Duke of Sussex refused to move. He told the security officer he would not leave until he knew whether his father intended to continue their conversation. His defiance remained, but beneath it sat something rawer: fear that the door would close again. William confronted Anne in a side room. The future king accused her of creating the opening that made the crisis possible. She accepted responsibility for inviting Harry privately, but warned her nephew that punishment could not replace reconciliation. The princess told him that control might protect the institution while still destroying the family. Charles felt that conflict most sharply. Canceling the reception had defended his authority, yet it had publicly humiliated the son he had privately missed. The king had acted as sovereign in the hall. Alone, he carried the guilt of a father. Catherine uncovered one detail that changed the emotional balance. Harry had brought no press team, no recording equipment, no prepared statement, and no public entourage. The princess understood that his decision to remain suggested something personal, not performative. Catherine approached Charles quietly and asked for one final concession: meet Harry again before dawn, without accusations, officials, or palace procedure. For the first time that night, the decision was no longer about who had broken protocol. It was about whether Charles could speak to Harry as a father before the palace removed him as a problem. Shortly before dawn, Charles entered a modest sitting room far from the state apartments. Harry was waiting beside an unlit fireplace, no longer wearing the expression of defiance seen in the front row. There were no private secretaries, no advisors, and no members of the family seated between them. The king closed the door but did not lock it. Then he removed his ceremonial pin, placed it on the table, and asked his son to begin again. Catherine had persuaded William to accept the second meeting. The princess argued that Harry's unauthorized seat and his emotional purpose had to be judged separately. The future king resisted, but she reminded him that anger could identify the breach without explaining the pain behind it. He finally stepped aside, though his trust remained badly damaged. Charles imposed one condition before Harry spoke. Nothing said in the room could be used for public advantage by either side, even if reconciliation failed. A ceremonial pin is a formal royal badge worn during official duties, and removing it carried a clear message. For this conversation, he wanted to speak as a father, rather than as the sovereign. Harry admitted he had accepted the front row card because he feared another hidden meeting would disappear into silence. The Duke of Sussex believed the family could later deny that he had tried to return, while advisors could close the door again without explanation. He wanted proof that his father had seen him. Charles answered with painful honesty. The king said being forced into a public reaction had made him feel not like a father, but like a target. Harry did not argue. He acknowledged that accepting the seat had caused damage, even if he had not arranged it. Harry then made his position clear. He did not expect immediate restoration of duties, titles, or trust. The prince wanted a direct channel to Charles that could not be blocked by rival offices or competing advisors. He asked for access to his father, not automatic access to the crown. Charles reached for the place card and tore it once through the middle. The monarch told his son that no chair could restore what had been broken, and no public appearance could erase years of pain. Honest conduct, however, might begin repairing it. The decision followed quietly. Charles agreed to scheduled private contact with Harry, but ruled that he would not resume official duties or attend royal events without formal approval. The king offered family access, not institutional restoration. William was waiting outside when the door opened. Charles told his elder son that the decision was final. The prince now had to choose whether healing could begin without surrendering necessary boundaries. Charles had offered Harry a path back to his father, not a path back to the throne, but the world outside Windsor would soon interpret the cancelled reception in far harsher terms. By sunrise, the palace's carefully worded explanation had already lost control of the story. Britain did not see a private father and son conversation or the conditions agreed behind closed doors. It saw an empty reception hall, departing guests, and Harry being driven through Windsor's rear gate. The cancellation became a national symbol, interpreted by some as royal cruelty, by others as necessary discipline, and by nearly everyone as proof that the family's deepest fracture remained painfully visible. Broadcasters interrupted morning programs with the same urgent account. Charles had cancelled the reception moments after recognizing Harry among the principal guests. Principal guests are those given the most prominent seats, because their presence carries public importance. That detail transformed the event from a family surprise into a question of royal authority. Palace communications officials refused to explain who had approved the prince's entry. Their silence deepened speculation over whether his appearance had been a gesture of reconciliation, an act of protest, or a serious internal security failure. Every theory carried danger, because each suggested that control inside Windsor had weakened. Outside Henry Fiery Gate, the main public entrance used by visitors and staff at Windsor Castle, a crowd formed around a newspaper vendor. He held up a front page showing rows of abandoned gold chairs beneath 4 words: "The seat that emptied the palace." Strangers argued beneath it, as though the chair belonged to the nation. A morning broadcaster called the cancellation the instant a family dispute overpowered royal ceremony. Commentators divided immediately. Some praised Charles as a disciplined sovereign who defended the crown. Others saw a wounded father punishing his son in front of the world. William watched the coverage beside Catherine and grew visibly angry when presenters described Harry's appearance as an attempted return to royal duty. The prince insisted that no restoration had been offered. She reminded him that silence would allow strangers to define the night, and the future king knew she was right. Camilla asked Charles whether the palace should publicly blame the dismissed advisors. The queen consort believed naming them might protect the monarch from further criticism. He refused. The king decided that defending the institution could not mean sacrificing staff to hide the family's failures. The palace released a second statement, confirming that Harry's attendance had not been authorized under the approved reception plan. Yet the wording avoided condemning him personally. That restraint was deliberate. Charles then prepared a final internal declaration separating two issues forever: Harry's place inside the family and his status inside the working monarchy. The public had turned one front-row chair into a verdict on the entire House of Windsor, leaving Charles to define what Harry would and would not be allowed to become. The final decision was neither the dramatic ban William's supporters expected, nor the full reconciliation Harry's defenders demanded. Charles chose a harder middle path. His younger son would retain a private relationship with his father, and would no longer be treated as an outsider at every family moment. But the front row incident had confirmed that personal reconciliation could never be confused with restored royal authority. Harry would be welcomed as family only under boundaries established openly, formally, and without manipulation. Charles moved first against the officials who had bypassed the approved seating process. The king permanently removed both from their roles and made one principle clear: no advisor could manufacture a confrontation in the name of helping the crown. The crown means the monarchy as an institution, including its authority, duties, and public responsibilities. Loyalty had limits, and those limits had been crossed. The monarch then confirmed that Harry would not return to working royal duties, represent him publicly, or take an official place at state receptions without approval through normal channels. A working royal is a family member who carries out formal duties on behalf of the sovereign. That path remained closed. Harry accepted private meetings with his father under strict confidentiality. The Duke of Sussex understood that these conversations would be personal, not political, and that no private contact could be presented as restored status. His relationship with Charles would continue, but it would stand apart from ceremonial privilege. Harry met his father one final time before leaving Windsor. The king did not embrace him. Instead, he placed a hand briefly on his son's shoulder and said, "Next time, come through the door I open." The words carried both warning and mercy. William did not reconcile fully with his brother. The Prince of Wales still believed the front-row appearance had crossed a serious line. Yet he agreed not to obstruct private contact between Harry and Charles. His boundary remained firm without becoming permanent exile. Camilla dismissed the advisor who had acted through her household. The queen consort accepted that silence had allowed someone else to use her influence. Anne reached a different conclusion. The princess admitted that forcing peace could be as damaging as refusing it. Both women understood that reconciliation had to be chosen, never engineered. Canceling the reception protected Charles's sovereign authority, but the private meeting that followed preserved his humanity. Harry did not regain his former royal life, and the king did not erase the damage between them. What they achieved was smaller, harder, and more honest. Direct communication, clear consequences, and the acceptance that love does not automatically restore trust. The evening reception never took place, but the cancellation accomplished something the ceremony could not. It forced King Charles and Prince Harry to define their relationship honestly and gave the monarchy a final, unmistakable boundary between family forgiveness and royal duty. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.